Good morning. It's Friday. So unfurl the banners, sound the trumpets, release the doves. We're going to have a great talk with Joti Brar. Let's talk. Hello, all. It's Friday, and great things going on now. People are upset, people are angry. But something Jody told me a while back, and and it really stuck, and I've said it many times in many different ways, and that is when we see the system that we're living under going south, shall we say, rather than try to save the system, rather than try to lament, oh my gosh, things are falling apart. Rather than that, we can look at it and say it's an unfair system. It's a brutal and vicious and genocidal system. We should celebrate it and say, hooray, now we can do better. The opportunity is there to do better. I had a caller on my Pacifica radio show in DC one week, and he said, this is terrible. And Garland, things are going bad. At the time, he was trying to get me to vote for Kamala Harris. And I'm like, I'm not voting for Harris or Trump. Get out of here. But he said, yeah, things are going bad, and we've got to try to save this system while we can. And I said, you got me wrong, pal. I'm not the cure. I'm the disease, right? I ain't trying to save this system. I'm part of what makes sure that we move on to a fairer system. At any rate, so let's talk about revolution. You recently spoke and about basically those of us who are doing the work that needs to be done to wake people up to what's actually going on here. I have often heard this: the cure for fear is action, right? People are afraid. They're horrified at what they're seeing. Oh my gosh, I can't afford to buy anything. Oh goodness, it looks like these lunatics are trying to start World War III, blah, blah, blah. I think people need to understand what's going on. And so what you talked about, I like this. We are the links in the long chain of revolution. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about the things that create the environment for revolution, where we are now in that chain of events that gets to a point where people just can't take the pain anymore and they have to do something. Your thoughts, Joti Brar?
That's such not a small question. Garland, you love to set me up to just go on an hour and a half rant and then go, okay, good, see you next time.
Right.
Just coming back specifically to so we're links in a chain. Let's start there. We have a movement that was founded by Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. That's the Marxist movement, was founded by those two who turned Marxism from a kind of sentiment amongst a section of the workers and even the bourgeois that they didn't like the symptoms of capitalist exploitation, the things it was creating in terms of the poverty and distress of the working class. They didn't like to see that, and they wanted to resolve it somehow and to live in a world that was fairer, to a position of understanding what's the root of capitalist exploitation. That's what Marx did with Capital. He laid bare exactly the mechanism by which the capitalist class enslaves the working class. It keeps it as its wage slaves. And those workers for wages, when they work, they produce wealth. That wealth is appropriated by the employers. And so in the course of working and producing wealth, the working class itself gets poorer while the ruling class gets richer. And this mechanism slowly, steadily, but very surely concentrates the wealth of society into the hands of the exploiting class. As history progresses under this system, the numbers of exploiters get smaller. The numbers of wage slaves gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And alongside the number of wage slaves who are being exploited, the numbers of unemployed and underemployed also gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And these are the inevitable result of this system of production. You know, people, there used to be a phrase, the poor are always with us, a kind of acceptance as we came out of feudalism and into capitalism, that dispossessed proletarians, people with absolutely nothing and no way to survive unless someone would employ them. And what happens to those who can't find employment, right? They're totally destitute. The poor are always with us. We must provide for them in some way. There must be alms, there must be charity, there must be workhouses, there must be, you know, some kind of regime that does something about the poor, because we've accepted that they're inevitable. Well, they are inevitable for so long as you have capitalism, capitalist production relations. They are not inevitable in terms of human history. They're not something that just naturally occurs. They are the result. Dispossessed, propertyless people who are unable to survive, who have no access to any way to feed themselves. They can't garden on a bit of land. They can't get wages from an employer. If they do get wages, they're not enough to survive on. You know, the existence of this class, which grows exponentially as capitalism develops over time, is the product of this system of production. What Marxism also showed us was how the capitalist system developed out of the production relations of feudalism. It was developing inside feudalism and it grew out of it. It burst the bonds of feudalism. It overthrew feudalism at a certain point and established itself as the main way of producing. Marxism shows you the development of human society and human history. It shows you that there were moments in which capitalist production was revolutionary. It offered things to humanity. Let's look at what capitalism brought to humanity in its early revolutionary times. It brought us the end of feudalism. And remember, feudal exploitation is a kind of static system in which you are born into a place you're going to die in. You're tied to a piece of land and to a lord. Okay, there's a system of duties and responsibilities, but if you're the serf on the bottom, essentially you're going to be born on a patch of land. Your job for the rest of your life is to farm it, and half of what you produce when you're doing that will go to your lord. And you produce children, you produce wealth in the form of food mainly, and you die, and your children are born into that position, and they'll do the same. Capitalism burst that system apart. That was a revolutionary act. By that act, the ability of people to move freely was brought about. Before then, you couldn't move off the bit of land you were born on, most people. Well, that was revolutionary to an extent. That was freeing to an extent. The problem was we replaced one system of exploitation by another. And the apparent freedom of the worker under capitalism hides his enslavement. We no longer have chains. We're no longer tied to a piece of land. But equally, our capitalist masters have no responsibilities towards us. If they can't employ us, we're free to go and starve in a ditch. And this is the real freedom for the worker under capitalism, the freedom to be either exploited and thereby recreate the conditions of your enslavement, because you're producing the wealth that keeps the exploiting class in power over you and your family and your class. Either you work to recreate that system or you die, because you don't have any other options. You don't have a piece of land on which you can keep yourself and your family alive. In fact, in the early days of the transition to capitalism and the early days after the capitalist revolution in Britain, there was a lot of discussion about how you needed to make the gardens for workers smaller, because if they're able to feed themselves even slightly, they're a bit bolshy. They're a bit independent-minded, and that's no good for the capitalists, right? They literally had systematic plans to stop the workers being able in any way to be independent, to feed themselves. No matter that means when they're unemployed, they starve and die. That's fine with the capitalists. The point is you have to be good exploitation fodder. And that means you have to have nothing and no choice, because that also means you can be exploited on the worst possible terms and conditions, especially if there's loads of unemployed competing with you for the work, right? So they don't even have to pay you really survivable wages. So the early days of capitalism exploded the feudal system, gave us a modicum of individual liberty, but it turns out that that liberty was always constrained by the system that had replaced the old feudal system. The other revolutionary thing, which is huge, the role that the bourgeois revolution played in history, is pushing back the boundaries of science. So particularly in its early days, the bourgeoisie was very interested in understanding the world, the better to apply the laws of nature that it worked out to making money. When they worked out her laws of physics, of chemistry, of geology, of all kinds of things, biology, they were able to apply those in the productive processes to make chemicals, to apply laws of physics to producing energy. So with all of this great advance in knowledge, there was a great advance in the productive forces of society. And there's a phrase, I think in Capital, I can't really remember where I think it was Marx talking about mankind didn't know what productive forces were sleeping in its lap. And capitalism, this huge drive to push back science in order to advance and develop productive forces, to be able to produce on a bigger and bigger scale, more and more efficiently. What that did was enable humanity for the first time since class society began in the days of ancient slavery, enabled humanity to solve the problem of giving a good life to every single member of society. We now have productive forces that are capable of doing that. Capable, but they're not doing it. So this force has been created by the ruling class, by the capitalist system. Actually, it's been, of course, produced like everything by the work of workers. But under the system of capitalism, these huge productive forces and this productive capacity and capability with a kind of limitless ability to expand has been produced under this system. The problem comes in that this system can't apply it, can't use it to its full capability. Capitalism is not capable of raising the living standards for the masses, even though it has created productive forces which can do that. The capitalist system, because it sucks the wealth away from the poor to the rich, is not able to raise the poor's living standards. They don't have money to buy back the things that they're producing. And the capitalists can't get rid of them without making a profit, because the whole basis of capitalism is not to provide things, not to revolutionize anything. Those are byproducts. What capitalist production is for taking a stack of capital, which is money you can invest productively, i.e., that will come back as more money. The only way capital ultimately comes back as more money is through the labor of workers. There's a whole load of other stuff, stock market bubbles and things that go on that make it look as if you can make money out of nothing. But these are symptoms of crisis in the system. In reality, wealth is produced by the work of workers. And you have this contradiction whereby the capitalist class needs to exploit workers and employ them to produce all these goods. In the battle against one another, they are constantly looking to expand production and bring in economies of scale, because if you bring in economies of scale in your production, you can outcompete your rivals and put them out of business. But then you've got yourself in a position where you've got more products to sell. So you're doing that on the one hand, constantly expanding the number of products you can produce. On the other hand, you're impoverishing the workers by paying them as little as possible and putting as many of them out of work as possible, because that's a way of saving money on your particular bottom line. But if you add that up across society, that's a contradiction that can't be solved. It's a contradiction that can't be solved. So you've got all this wealth accumulating one end and all this poverty at the other end. You're producing all these products, but the workers are too poor to buy them. And in the end, the workers are the market. So you have this problem that capitalism is constantly impoverishing the workers to try to escape from its crisis. But by impoverishing the workers, it makes the crisis worse, because by impoverishing the workers, you're reducing the market. And you can't fix this in capitalism. People are always coming up with schemes to fix this. You can't fix it. What you can do is recognize, which Marxism shows us scientifically, that within the confines of the present economic system, the forces that will go on to create the new system, the next stage of human development, have been created. And those forces are, on the one hand, this huge productive capacity, this ability to exponentially expand production of all necessary goods, which means if you're not producing for profit, if you put the working class in charge of those productive forces and remove the profit motive and create a planned economy, you will be able to plan the use of those productive forces to meet not just the basic needs of everyone on the planet, in the country to start with, but eventually on the planet, but a rising standard of living for everybody will be possible and ultimately inevitable. So these forces have been created by capitalism. On the one hand, these incredible productive forces. On the other hand, a class of wage workers, proletarians, people who have no stake in the present system, and the people who actually work these means of production. You put these two things together, they are going to be the basis on which you build a new society. Proletarians in charge of these great productive forces with a planned economy instead of production for profit. You see how that's the basis of developing from capitalism to socialism. Now, when we look at the world today, what we see is capitalism that has become so senile, decaying. You know, what senile, what do we mean? Look at Joe Biden as a perfect example. You know, so old and decrepit that it's a kind of shadow and caricature of its former self. You know, Marx and Engels were able to explain all the root causes of what we see today from the 1840s onwards. Marx published the first volume of Capital in 1867, but the essence of what he was saying was in the Communist Manifesto in 1848. They spent their lifetimes working out the details. But the reason they were able to do that then, and it wasn't done any earlier, was really because it was only in the 1820s that it started to become apparent the limitations of the capitalist system, that there weren't just some social problems that people didn't like seeing, there were inbuilt contradictions to the system that couldn't be overcome. So the first real overproduction crisis was very obvious in the 1820s. And after that, like every 10 years, the cycle came back. There was another crisis, a boom-bust cycle, roughly every 10 years after 1820 has never left us. And in fact, since the era of imperialism in the 20th century, we have had crises that, because they become global, they become, you know, kind of permanent and inescapable. And the only way out of those has been world war. These are the results of capitalism in decay. And capitalism in decay produces monopoly, which then, you know, monopoly capitalism produces imperialism, which is this quest across the world to export your crisis and solve your crisis by going abroad and seizing territories and finding ways to revitalize an economy which is suffering from overproduction crisis. In the 20th century, Lenin identified during World War I, this is what's going on. And he said, look, this makes the system absolutely ripe for revolution. This overproduction crisis, which is global, which is endemic, now that the capitalist system is across all corners of the world, the crisis affects everywhere. They can't expand out of it into an empty market somewhere. They can only fight one another. And the depth of the crisis and the fierceness of the fighting is bringing the working class to realization that it must make revolution if it doesn't just want to be, you know, expendable cannon fodder and see its living standards constantly pushed into the dirt. And so this system has been ripe for revolution since 1917. Now, the fact that somehow managed to restabilize itself after World War II, mainly because of the existence of the United States of America. US imperialism was the one imperialist power that didn't get fundamentally hold below the waterline, like all the old imperialist powers did, including Japan, Germany, France, Britain, all terminally wounded by what happened to them in World War I and World War II, even the victors, right? But the USA made money through both of those, got stronger, got bigger, expanded its economy, expanded its military, expanded its industrial base, became the world capitalist superpower, and was able to shore up the other imperialist powers under its kind of protective umbrella as part of the fight to try to stop the advance of socialism. Socialism from the October Revolution in 1917 through the Second World War, the great defeat of fascism by the socialist forces, the unleashing of the anti-colonial revolutions in the 1940s, 50s, 60s, 70s, which was all impelled by the rise of socialism. This situation was one which was really putting the imperialist ruling classes on notice that their system was in a very precarious place. And the USA propped up the other imperialists really out of a kind of self-interest that it couldn't be the only big capitalist power in the world. And they had a kind of this slightly, as we see today, it's a slightly shaky alliance, but they group together because they have to. They have to because the power of the masses has become actually very strong. We had a big temporary setback with the fall of the Soviet Union and the East European socialist countries. There was a kind of triumphalism on behalf of the USA and its satellites that this is the end of history. There's no revolution that can succeed. Look, we told you all along that socialism is not what you need, and now you can see it's a failure. So they were totally triumphal. And of course, financially, they were cock-a-hoop. They had this huge looting bonanza. For a short period of time, the Soviet Union essentially became their colony. The East European people's democracies were recolonized and remain so to this day, up until the point where President Putin's government started to coalesce around a national program and start step by step to defend its national sovereignty. The ruling financial elites of the West were having a field day. They plundered and looted. And that, of course, revived a system which in the 1980s, if we remember, was in a deep crisis. The post-war boom came to an end at the end of the 1960s. Through the 70s, if you look across the West, there were all kinds of industrial disputes going on because the ruling class had decided, well, it was forced to start to unpick the social gains that had been granted to workers to stop them from going for revolution. But this social pact, this peace deal, was beginning to be unpicked. And, we've talked before about the role that anti-communist ideology played in the post-war period in the West in lulling the workers of the West to sleep and making them feel there was a path to socialism that didn't involve a revolution. And unfortunately, what we've seen and what the workers really have to learn is there's no way to displace this ruling elite without serious organization and without a clash of class against class. They will not give up their position by persuasion. They will not let us take hold of their state machinery and run it for our benefit. That's something very important people have to understand. I really recommend to everybody to read Lenin's book, The State and Revolution, which he wrote in 1917, when his party and his people were facing this same conundrum. Can we get what we need by winning the elections? Is it possible to replace all the people in parliament and in the civil service and say, right, now we're having socialism, we're going to do socialist policies? And what he explained and showed very clearly is it's not possible. The state machinery we have has been perfected as a machinery of suppression, but by a minority exploiting class. So it's no use for a class that wants to come to power as a majority non-exploiting ruling class. When we say we're going to have socialism, we will still have a state machinery of repression, but it will be an entirely different one, because its job will be to repress the former exploiters and stop them carrying out a counter-revolution to come back to power. But the ruling class will now no longer be exploiters and will no longer be a minority. So the type of machinery we need to facilitate our democracy, democracy for the masses, and dictatorship against a small minority, is a totally different sort of machine that we have to build from the ground up. We can't take over the old repressive machinery and expect it to work. Not only that, but the old machinery, all its habits, all its functionaries are trained to keep the present ruling class in power. That's their job. That's what they're trained for. That's what they understand. We can't expect them to serve a different class and a different social order. It simply isn't possible. So I think I've said enough for now, probably.
Well,
Some of the ideas across.
One of the things that I think, let me ask you about this, because it is present day issue, and that is, the discussion of a unity of policy position, a unity of ideology within the government. Like people, oh, well, if we just get Bernie Sanders to win, oh, he's going to be president and change everything. And I'm reading the other day, and Bernie's like, every time I read, there's some imperialist. Maduro is an evil dictator in Venezuela who must be stopped. For some reason, he always seems to align with the imperialist against any revolutionary government around the world. And now he's like, well, now that the Israelis have killed the latest Hamas leader or Hamas person, now maybe we can have peace. Peace through Bernie Sanders. He literally tweeted, now that they've killed the Sinwar so-and-so, maybe we can have peace. Peace through violence, peace through war, peace through assassination, right? Your thoughts on the Israeli situation and what we can learn from that regarding there's this pretense that there's two sides and they're fighting, and that there's a social democrats, that now when this whole Israeli conflict comes, people who even thought that some of the Sanders or whoever may be in government may suddenly wake up and say that's terrible. Nah, they may stick their toes out a little bit across the line. Well, I don't really like what's going on, but there's always a but. Your thoughts on what we can learn from the Israeli situation and the unity of government, the unity of ideology, the unity of people who let me say this. The Bernie Sanders pretended to be a class war guy. These kind of people, they pretended that we're about class and we're standing up for the little guy. But soon as the imperialists identify an enemy out there, he zeroes in on it with the imperialist. Your thoughts?
Absolutely. Well, the first thing we have to understand is that bourgeois politics, which is the kind of politics we have in front of us, right? Politics of the bourgeois system, is a career. It's a career. You get paid for a certain role and function. And Bernie Sanders' job, just like Jeremy Corbyn's job always was in the Labour Party, is to present a socialist veneer on democratic politics, Democrat politics in your case, or in our case, Labour Party politics with Jeremy Corbyn, to fool working people of socialist leanings that there's a way to reach where they want to get to via the electoral process and via establishment organizations. And of course, it's a con. It's a psyop, as we say in our modern terminology, having learned how many psyops are being conducted against us all the time. Social democracy is a psyop. It is a trick to pacify the working class and misdirect their energies, constantly reinforced by all kinds of lefts outside the main Democrat parties, and Labour Party, who force the attention of workers back towards them. So you'll see revisionist communists, people who used to be communists a long time ago, have revised their doctrine to the point where you can't tell the difference between them and the Democrats, right? You have them, we have them. The same with Trotskyites, right? So these people present themselves as communists, as revolutionaries. They'll wrap up their program and their demands and their activities with red flags and pictures of Lenin and words about Marx and Stalin, probably not Stalin, Marx and Lenin and Engels, all kinds of things, vocabulary that sounds revolutionary. So their job is, again, they're the left wing of social democracy. They're there to catch the people who are becoming disillusioned. This isn't working. What we need is a revolution. They say, yes, we need a revolution. We need a revolution. But then what's their activity? Oh, we must vote for Bernie. We must vote for Jeremy. We must vote Democrat. We must vote Labour because it's better than the alternative. This least, lesser of two evils, least worst option. It's a con. It is there to catch people who might otherwise fall into the arms of the revolutionaries. The ruling class has learned more from the October Revolution than the working class has in most of the world. They saw the successful formula of Lenin and the Bolsheviks. And they said, bloody hell, we can't have them doing that here. We can't let them do it again. So what do we see? For example, our movement's full of people telling us, oh, there's no point trying to sell newspapers anymore. People don't read them. They don't want them. They're not interesting. They're not useful. Give it up. Anyway, you can just put it all on the internet. But look at the Trotskyite organizations. And I guarantee you 100% of them, on some level, they're being backed and funded by the state. They all sell newspapers all the time. Right? What does that tell you? The ruling class knows that physical literature is really important, and they're flooding the market with it to make the really revolutionary stuff hard to find. They're drowning us in fake communism so that the real communism is very difficult for ordinary people to distinguish in this mass of revolutionary sounding slogans and revolutionary looking artwork and, people revolutionary looking, publications with pictures of Marx and Engels and Lenin all over them, and red flags and Soviet iconography, so they understand the danger that's represented by a genuine communist party genuinely getting deep roots into the masses. They fear it like the plague, and they're right to. They're right to. The con job they've done on us is to make us fear it. This is our salvation. And they've taught us to have a kind of knee-jerk fear reaction from the word communist or the name of the great communists, Marx, Engels, Lenin, Stalin. My God, these people are evil baby-eating monsters. How can you go near them? Or even people who start to go towards it, but they're like, oh, yeah, but it's all a bit obscure and obscurant. It's a bit old. It's a bit Victorian, Oh, Capital's really hard. You can't really read Marx. It's impossible. You have to be a professor to read that stuff. All the professors who claim to have read Capital, whenever I listen to them, I think, are you sure you read Capital? Because what you got out of it is nothing like what I got out of it. You want to put Capital in the hands of workers, and they will grasp its revolutionary content. They don't see it as an intellectual exercise, tick a box and feel proud of how clever you are. No, for them, it's a fighting document. And it really is. And that is why the ruling class works so hard to turn us away from picking up these fighting documents and mastering them, grasping the essence of what they have to teach us. It was very interesting for me to see recently a statement from the Workers' Party of Korea. I think it was from the party, or it might have been from a State Department of the DPRK. But anyway, it came out of North Korea talking about Palestine. And they said, basically, they're drawing lessons from the last year. And they said the lesson of the last year of struggle is basically that negotiating with the imperialists is pointless. They will lie to you. They have no interest. They're not going to stick to their word. They have no interest in fulfilling any of your demands. Quite the reverse. Their interests are the opposite of yours. The only way that the Palestinian people will get freedom is by fighting for it. And that's what we're seeing in the Middle East. What is the driving force of the liberation struggle that we see now? It's the armed resistance across the region, and they're all working closer and closer together. And they all understand that their enemy is Zionism, and that behind Zionism stands Anglo-American imperialism. And that this fight, more and more of them are saying more and more clearly, this fight will not end until the US and Britain and France, as well as Israel, are out of the Middle East, because there's no peace for us. There's no chance for us to decide our future while these forces remain here. And it's not just a question of Israel. It's not, the two-state solution is over. The Palestinians tried it. They made in Oslo Accords back in 1990, I'm sorry if I get the year wrong, maybe 94, around then, historic compromise in a particular global situation. Remember, the Soviet Union had just fallen. The USA was striding the world, saying everything that happens under our watch. And the USA inserted itself into that peace process, as it did every peace process of that period. Yes. And they said, we will broker between you two warring parties. We will help you come to an agreement. The Palestinians, well, not all of them, but the majority, signed up to this process because they'd been struggling and struggling and struggling. And they said, if you're going to actually let us have peace, we will accept two states, and we will accept you stealing 78% of our country in return for being left alone on the remaining 22%. That was the deal they signed up to. They didn't get it. They never, ever got what they signed up to. The Israelis used the peace process to make facts on the ground, as they call them, i.e. to build more settlements, to create a deeper and deeper apartheid system, to continue to terrorize Palestinians and every neighboring Arab country, and to use their technological dominance and their imperialist backing to keep expanding and keep trying to cleanse the greater Palestinian area of Palestinian people. They never gave up on that project. And so the resistance, the people of the region have learned. There's no peaceful way to achieve our sovereignty and independence. There's no peaceful way to liberate ourselves from the permanent looting of imperialist corporations, the permanent threat of imperialist attack through the Zionist attack dogs. There's no way to reason with these people. All we can do is defeat them. And when I look at the Middle East today, what I see is that this process is underway in earnest. And I do not believe it's going to end until complete victory, which means the collapse of Israel as an apartheid Zionist, supremacist regime, and the ejection of the imperialists from the region. And this is a struggle which is will finish the liberation war that actually began in that region during World War I, but which has been stopped by the constant interventions of imperialism from that day to this.
Let me show you something. You talk about these fakes out here. You're going to love this. You are going to love this. This is, I found this. It's one of these CIA front organizations that supposedly, it's a Marxist kind of blah, blah, blah. Look at this.
A Marxist case for voting for Kamala.
For Kamala Harris. Okay.
It's so disgusting, isn't it?
Yeah, if you go down here, the beginning of the end of China's rise.
Like that's a good thing.
Yeah. Let's see. Ukraine, a people's peace, not an imperialist peace. Joint declaration by eco-socialists, whatever that is, anarchists, feminist, environmental organizations, and groups in solidarity with the Ukrainian resistance, right?
Go back to that list, Garland. Go back to that list, right? Eco-socialism, PSYOP, anarchism, petty bourgeois, feminism, petty bourgeois, environmental organizations. They're all PSYOPs. They're all fronts for the system, right? They're all fronts for imperialism. They're all funded and promoted by imperialism against the working class movement in their home countries. It's one of the things they've become really, really, really good at, is creating a whole load of fakely progressive ideologies with which to confuse, divide, misdirect the anger of their own people. And, we must admit that on that front, they've been particularly effective.
Suspend Ukrainian debt payments. Let's see. I mean, if you go on and on and on, it
Just
is,
send more money to the
yes,
fascists.
exactly. A socialist journal. And I mean, this thing is such garbage. Solidarity. So this is, and look, they've got a red fist with like a woman's little sign, a socialist, feminist, anti-racist organization, Solidarity. When you look at this thing, it is like, if it wasn't, it should have a link directly to MI6 and the CIA all over it. It is unbelievable. When you read it, one thing I found, they're very smart, because when you start going into the networks and the links and who they're connected with, you find out that, interestingly enough, they have a website for like Ukraine Solidarity Group in England. This is in the US. It looks like it was made by the same person. I mean, it looks the same. I'm like, it's interesting. They're, and it connects to these so-called Marxist organizations and Leninist organizations that are all about like imperialism.
Trotskyism.
Question though. I'm going to throw two words at you,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm going to get, because in the discussion of capitalism and why it's so good, there's a term that you hear all the time, right? The free market. And that sounds great. We love freedom, don't we? And there's a market out here, and that everything's good with the free market. Your thoughts on that term when you hear free market? That's what we hear, the free market.
I mean, the hilarious thing about people who bang on about the free market is that the free market died about 100 years ago. But people don't even understand the significance of the term, or what it's ever really covered. Free market at its origin means the freedom for the ruling class to exploit labor power and sell wherever it wants to with no barriers. Britain decimated huge numbers of workers, wiped out generations of British workers under the reign of the free market. It's a free country. It's a free market. You have the right to come and be a wage slave for me under the conditions that I set, or to die in a ditch. That's the freedom of the free market. In fact, the real free market. Under the free market, when there were no competitors to British capitalism anywhere in the world, it exported its control, its productive resources, its exploiting capacity across the globe. It undercut the markets everywhere because it was producing on a bigger scale for cheaper. So it destroyed industry all around the world and made new markets for itself under the free market. The free market disappears for capitalists when their interests are threatened. So, for example, German capital, even US capital, I think, certainly I know Germany is the classic case, when German capital was trying to catch up with British and French capital, it made extensive use of protective tariffs to stop Britain constantly coming in and undercutting it while it was trying to build itself up. But also of state support for the development of big monopoly concerns in the German economy, so that they could rival the British ones, which had already developed into monopolies because Britain was 200 years ahead of Germany, right? So in order to catch up and become a big monopoly imperialist power, Germany made use of protected market and state assistance in developing its monopolies. Supporting the rise of the German banks and the German, big industrialists. So the free market is something that they talk about like they really, it's fundamentally the law of how they work, but it's not. And I guess Lenin pointed out, and it was already evident in Britain at the time that Capital was being written, that at a certain point in capitalist development, free market activity develops into its opposite, because the steady concentration of capital, the steady move from many small capitals to 3 or 4 huge ones in each sector of productive activity creates monopolies. And monopolies act to stifle competition. You know, we're always taught that free market competition is the essence of capitalism. Well, if that was once the case, sort of in particular conditions now and again, never quite the halcyon picture that's painted to us, but nevertheless, you know, there was an element of free market competition being the thing that impelled development at a certain historical stage. That historical stage is over. Yes, we still have some competition existing alongside and beneath and around monopoly, but our economies are characterized by monopoly. There's no area of your life where you don't use something and where the economy is not fundamentally controlled by the activities of a monopoly. We know that there's an energy market cartel. We know there's a telecoms cartel. We know there's a big tech cartel on the internet, you know, software cartels. We know bank cartels. We know there's 2 or 3 or 4 huge arms companies, you know, in each significant economic sector. There's 3 or 4 big monopolies that control the market in your country, and those ones probably control the market in most of the world. Right? All around the world, people are using the same stuff made by the same companies. So the idea that this is all a reflection of the free market and free market activities, and if you just leave the market alone, it will solve all of its problems, this is a total nonsense. The people who refer back to Adam Smith and even David Ricardo, you know, these economists were describing the situation as it was in the 18th and even 17th centuries. They are not describing what you see in front of you today, and they did not fully understand even what they were describing at the time they were describing it. You know, it's made much clearer for you in Capital, which I always come back to, why people should read it. You know, if you want to really understand what the free market is and how it operates, where it came from historically, you know, it's not just something that kind of came from the sky. It developed out of certain historical conditions. And I've said to you before, you know, the prerequisite, I can't say that word, bloody hell, the prerequisite for a free market is, on the one hand, a bunch of people who have already accumulated enough wealth that they can use it as capital, which means they can invest it to employ enough people that their capital will come back to them bigger, and not just pay them to stay alive, but pay them enough that they've got more that they can reinvest, that their investable fund of wealth has grown as a result. So your capital has to be a certain level already to start that process. So for the free market capital situation to exist, those people already have to exist. On the one hand, you already need people who've got a load of wealth in their hands that they can use to employ a bunch of people and extract wealth from them and keep that cycle going. On the other hand, you need a class of people, a whole load of people who have no other way of surviving than by selling their ability to work to those people who have wealth. So all of that didn't fall out of the sky. It's the result of a whole historical period of development. It's the result of the brutal dispossession and eviction of peasants from the land, turned into paupers, branded, you know, as vagabonds, enslaved. In the early days of capitalist production, many of the workers were slaves. They were kicked off their land, and then under the criminal code of the time, they were seen as vagabonds. What are you doing wandering around here with nothing to do? You're a vagabond. And second offense, you're branded. Third offense, you're a slave and given to some capitalist to make money out of. You know, this is the origins of the situation, which, you know what it's like, Garland? It's like, you know, if you create a nice life for your children, they're not grateful for what you've given them, because to them, it's just like wallpaper. It's like breathing. They came into that world. That's how the world is. We're born into a world where there are employers and employed, capitalists and wage slaves. We don't see where that came from. To us, it's like breathing. It's automatic. It's obvious that that's what the world is made of. You know, the wonderful thing about socialist science is how it puts all these things, brings together the historical development and shows you What are the preconditions for this free exchange? You know, in law, capitalist liberal ideology and capitalist law says in the marketplace, the employer and the worker meet as two free individuals and of their free will decide to enter into a contract together. That is the basis of all capitalist law and of capitalist kind of juridical relations and social relations, this idea that we're free. But of course, the unfreedom that underpins that free contract is never recognized or talked about. Yeah, but as I talked about earlier, that is the very basis of our free market is unfreedom.
Interesting. Before we leave, I'd like to take a couple minutes, just a few minutes, to look at one of these websites that I've saved a couple of them. Let's take a look at one here. It's the International Viewpoint. Now, you may notice there's a little Black Lives Matter thing going on here. Everybody's got on a nice blue mask, and there's a woman of color of some type, obviously leading the movement. A woman of color, what do you know? And then women of color all over the place. They've got their phones, so we know they're important. But let's look at International Viewpoint. The monthly English language magazine of the Fourth International, you could probably tell me what that is a window to radical alternatives worldwide, carrying reports, analysis, and debates from all corners of the globe. Correspondents in 50 countries report on popular struggles and the debates that are shaping the left of tomorrow. They certainly don't want the left of the past. They want the left of tomorrow. And after we see this all woman-led of color stuff, Black Lives Matter movement, we start going down Starmer's first 100 days. That should be an interesting, hopefully last 100 days. Let's see. Let's go down here. Oh, here's a good one. How dangerous is Chinese nationalism? How Kenya's youth, middle classes, and working poor join forces against the Russian war of aggression. The urgency of a radically decolonial left, right? For a democratic anti-war position on the invasion of Ukraine, support Ukrainian resistance and disempower fossil capital, right?
Fossil capital.
Fossil capital. I mean, you go down here and Eastern Europe's tragedy. I mean, this is DSA, that's Democratic Socialists of America, discusses Ukraine without an international socialist perspective. Why Russia's political capitalists went to war and how the war could end their rule. So now the fight against the Nazis in Ukraine is now about Russia's political capitalists and why they've got to lose, right? So it's just interesting when you look at this, and you see Democratic Socialist of America. Well, there you go. That's their kind of people. You see this thing that when I look, recently I was looking at these corporations that have, and when you look at the corporations, you can't find out what they do. There's no idea what they do. It will say that they have contracts with the Department of Defense and intelligence agencies. When you look at the leaders of the corporations, they look like that picture. Women, brown, white, you know, whatchamacallit. They all have a DEI person who's a Black female. They look exactly like that picture. Every single one of these CIA cutout corporations, and they don't realize or stop to think that I can look at these CIA cutout corporations and see the board of directors, and I can look at the International Viewpoint and look at the picture at the top of the page and say, it's exactly the same picture. I mean, they don't stop to, they're like, this is the way we do things. We got to have a woman of color and this and a bunch of masks and Black Lives Matters and all this kind of stuff on all of our CIA cutout corporations. And then they make a so-called socialist leftist website, and it looks exactly like them. And it never dawns on them, perhaps we should take another, make this thing at least look differently. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, just to come back to that website specifically, it says it's the website for the Fourth International. The Fourth International is the Trotskyist International, founded in opposition to the Third International, which was the Communist International. So its whole function is to be anti-communist, which means it's anti-working class, it's anti-socialist, it's anti-the future, It's anti the masses. It's anti the national liberation struggle. It's a tool of imperialism. As I talked to you earlier, you know, this is something that the ruling class has worked very hard at to produce a plethora of seemingly left-wing, seemingly revolutionary, seemingly communist, seemingly socialist literature and organizations with which to catch the untutored and unwary, well-meaning, revolutionary-leaning workers from around the world, catch them, misdirect them, use their energies until they get disillusioned and drop out, thinking that they've tried to build a socialist movement and it doesn't work. Well, of course, it's not going to work if the movement that you're trying to build is actually under the control of imperialism and its aims are aligned with the aims of imperialism. Of course, it's not going to be successful, is it? But that's the role that it plays. This kind of woke imagery, I think we have to have a new term for this. I guess we could call it rainbow washing. We used to talk about the way when it adopted the program of gay rights, the imperialists, they went from hating gays and outlawing them to realizing that they could back their struggle for equal rights and lawful recognition in society because it doesn't affect the capitalist relations of production. The capitalists can't solve the women's question. They can't solve the question of racism because to solve those means fundamentally affecting the relations of production, affecting imperialism, affecting class exploitation. But you can solve the contradiction between the people of some prejudice or other that basically was embodied in law against homosexual activity. You can solve that without affecting class relations. So they went from being, against homosexual relationships to kind of really championing them. And in the process, trying to take on the clothes of the protectors of minorities and protectors of people's rights, the clothes that belong to the communist movement. We are the only ones who are really for the equality of all the people, really for, of course, the capitalist system can't bring equality. Its very nature is to suck wealth from the masses and give it to a tiny minority. So how can the capitalist system give us equality? Of course it can't. So it uses the fact that it's promoted the aims of one struggle against inequality, which doesn't affect the real inequality of the system. It's just a struggle for recognition before the law, equality before the law, which in reality is no equality at all, because we're not all equal before the law. If we have different income levels and social class brackets, we don't get the same treatment in the law courts, do we? We all know that from experience. So bourgeois equality is a formal equality, not a real equality. There's no real equality between the unemployed, desperate worker and the owner of a massive multinational corporation, is there? In terms of their influence, their ability to shape the world's debate and their ability to, feed their family and live in a decent conditions. This rainbow washing is a way of trying to present a decadent, dying, parasitic system as if it is something progressive, as if it has something to offer to humanity, which of course it doesn't. They used to do it with having taken on the gay liberation mantle. They used to do this pinkwashing thing, didn't they? And it was always disgusting to me that they would attack socialist Cuba using this thing, the socialist Cuba that liberated all its people from their looting. They were like, we are the protectors of gay rights, and look at the awful homophobes in Cuba, because they didn't have gay marriage, right?
Can I add something?
Although they did have economic liberation and genuine equality of the masses. And they did the same thing in the Middle East. They pinkwashed Israel, this genocidal regime. People are only now seeing the true nature of the genocidal settler colonial regime, but it was always the same. Yet they pinkwashed it, said, look at it, it's a home of liberal democracy and they have gay rights, and isn't that great? And Iran, they won't have gay marriage, they'll oppress the homosexuals, look how awful they are. So they use these questions to confuse people about what it means to be genuinely progressive. But genuine progression is the defeat of imperialism and the establishment first of national independence and then of socialism. It is not settling one particular issue of prejudice.
You know, in Uganda, if you look at Uganda, so Uganda has these anti-gay laws, right? And so the liberals are going nuts. Oh my gosh, we got to do something about Uganda. They have the anti-gay laws. I started researching it. How did they get them? A couple of preachers from the southern preachers from the U.S. went to Uganda and started preaching the anti-gay religious rhetoric, built that up in Uganda and pushed them until they got these anti-gay laws. So the anti-gay laws came from U.S. evangelists, right? Once they got the anti-gay laws through Parliament, the U.S. empire then said, oh my gosh, they got anti-gay laws. Something must be done to stop this immediately. So they start a fire and then pretend to be the firemen.
And we see this all over the world, don't we? We see it with the war on terror, the war on drugs. These are all pretexts. They create the problem and then they create the solution. And the solution, weirdly enough, seems to make the problem worse, right? Because in the end, they're not interested in the people. They're interested in mechanisms of control. And the mechanism of control, they're interested in not for their own sake, but because it facilitates their looting, their economic domination of the world, which is fundamentally what they're interested in.
Yeah, I mean, I was going over the links, right? And the links that they have, it's interesting. On these, the internationalviewpoint.org, if you look at their links, for instance, Truth Out is the website. It's neoliberal to the core. It's the liberals to the core. If you go to Truth Out, I will guarantee you there's a whole bunch of, let's see if I can go there. You're going to find that where they try to walk the line, there's a lot of, all of this pro Kamala Harris stuff. You know what I mean? So they go to these, they link to all the websites that they link to are either fake socialist or neoliberal in a given country. It's all a pretense. And I'm looking and I'm like, the more I dig down into these links, you get hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of links. You see that the US, CIA and MI6 are spending a lot of money and a lot of resources to create this faux left thing. And it's ubiquitous in politics. It's unbelievable. And then the links, you just go. And so when I see this, I think of the Truth Outs and I think of some of these others, and I tend to think either they are projects of the machine or heavily infiltrated by the machine. But if the machine's linking to all of these, and I look at them and I'm like, I used to think, oh yes, they're left-leaning. And now that I understand, I'm like, oh my God, they're neoliberal crap. That a lot of these things that tend to be kind of walking the line, and they all do the same thing. Yes, we're against what's going on in Palestine, but we got to support Ukraine. They all have that same thing, that it's like they understand that they're going to lose, that when it comes to Palestine, they're not going to get most of these people, right? But they also see the importance, to me, and this is of the Ukraine conflict, that is important. It seems to me the big thing about the Ukraine conflict is, interestingly enough, I'm going to put this probably in a bad way, it rebuilt the Soviet Union in a way, or it is rebuilding, you know what I mean? It's forcing the Russians to reach back and do the things that the Soviet Union did that made it so it couldn't be defeated. And they know it, and they're seeing that, and they're willing to lose all of the other conflicts and screw everything else. I will put all this stuff aside. But this Ukraine thing is rebuilding this monster, and we don't like it. And that the left, the true hard left in the Russia, is kind of waking up and understanding that their way of thinking and the strength and the power that they had is needed, and they're being kind of welcomed back into the machine in a way, or at least they're pushing themselves back in, but it's reconstituting this dynamic, this anti-imperialist dynamic that was centered in Eurasia, as it were. I'll put it like that.
I really hope that you're right. I don't know enough about the internal politics of Russia to really understand which forces are coalescing on the left around the project. But I know, from my perspective, the role of communists in Russia today is to support the special military operation, support everything that pushes Vladimir Putin's government towards its socialist heritage and socialist past, towards rebuilding a resilient and self-sufficient economy and a military posture which is not just about Russia and Russian sovereignty, but also aligning itself more and more with the anti-imperialist camp, giving military aid to all those around the world who are fighting imperialism, understanding that the defeat of imperialism is our common struggle. I think it's vitally important that communists in Russia orient themselves that way and criticize their government, not for doing those things, but for not going hard enough into those directions, and do everything they can to support things that take in that direction and criticize what takes it in the opposite direction. That's the job of communists in Russia, as far as I can see it. I'm not in Russia, so I don't have that complicated task in front of me. But studying Lenin and really understanding what imperialism is crucial at this time, because people who haven't really grasped the system of imperialism and the incredible decay of the imperialist system, how rotten it is from the inside out, how by exporting capital to boost profits, they have destroyed their own domestic economies. They now are entirely parasitic countries. The workers in those countries are becoming increasingly destitute and angry about the fact that none of them have proper jobs. They don't make anything anymore because all the production is going on elsewhere, but they're still needing things. So their lives are very, you have a feeling of pointlessness when you live in a world where the only jobs available to you are in the service economy or servicing the financial economy somehow. Nobody is involved in the kind of self-esteem building work of building things to make life better, building things that people really need. Those jobs make you feel good about yourself. You understand you're playing a role in a meaningful social life. And the majority of people in the West now don't have meaningful jobs. Many of them are becoming increasingly destitute and working in very bad conditions and living in bad conditions. And the small better off section are bribed to play a part in maintaining this global system. But none of them do things which are meaningful. All of them, to some extent or another, are parasitic in the sense that the wealth on which they actually live, the products which they have to consume every day, are produced elsewhere in the world by workers, wealth-generating workers in other parts of the world. And they get a little kickback. And even the poorest in the West are still getting a little bit of a kickback from this setup, but it's not a situation that makes people feel good about their lives in any way. So this parasitic existence is really destroying our self-esteem in many ways. The importance, I think, of the SMO in Russia, the special military operation, and the fact that Russia is quite clearly winning against the combined military might of NATO on a big, serious battlefield that was prepared for 10 years physically by the imperialists, and for 30, you could even say 80 or 100 years ideologically by the imperialists, right? They've created a proxy army with this ideological warfare that's been ongoing for decades. They created physical fortifications and built a physical NATO army without the name of NATO on it in Ukraine for the last 8-10 years. The combined armed power of all the NATO countries, all of the Western world, all of imperialism has been thrown behind these forces, which also have on the ground support from NATO forces, right? Special advisors and people who deliver weapons and show you how to use them and maybe even fire them. And despite all of that preparation, money, force, arms, everything of the combined imperialist camp, Russia is decisively winning. And in the process, it is dismantling NATO's capabilities, and NATO is the military might that backs up the economic power of the imperialist camp. You know, it's an essential component of the imperialist system, and it's being destroyed in Ukraine in front of our eyes. And not only that, the myth of imperialist invincibility is being destroyed along with it. The imperialists won't stop trying to expand their wars, but the mentality of the people they're fighting everywhere is transformed. I have no doubt that a part of why the October 7th operation was launched when it was launched, and how it spread in the way it spread, and set fire to the people the way it has, is because it came in the wake of the events in Ukraine, whereby, number one, the attention and the arms and all of the money of the West was going over there, but also the victories of the anti-imperialist forces were already very clear. And this has changed, it's changed the calculus for everybody across the world. There's now this understanding that as imperialism teeters on the brink of an abyss of the worst ever, deepest ever economic crisis this system, this world has ever known, that's where they are right now. That's why they were desperate to launch a war against Russia and take hold of it and loot it and recolonize it and break it into pieces and dominate it in the way that they are still determined to try and do. But the rest of the world sees that this crisis, which is driving them to war, is also the result of a weakness in the system. They're not as strong as they used to be. And what we also see on the other side is that the resistance forces, whether in Russia or in the Middle East or in China or in North Korea, have not been sitting idle for the last 30 years. They have been building up their capacity for self-defense precisely because, even though they tried to make nice with the imperialists, the imperialists never stopped rattling sabers at them. And the reason was because they tried to make nice while also remaining independent. And the imperialists made it clear, independence is not an option. In the world that we dominate, you will be our slave or you will be nothing. And, you know, these countries say, well, we want to be independent. We'll try and get along with you while being independent. But after a while, you have to get the message. Even the slowest learner gets the message eventually. They're not going to leave us alone. Russia was sitting, watching Ukraine being militarized for 10 years. It was watching Ukraine be brainwashed for 30 years. They know all that is ultimately aimed at them. It wasn't just aimed at the Ukrainian people and Ukraine's wealth. It was always aimed at Russia. That's the function of Ukrainian nationalism, was always to create an anti-Russian army. So we're seeing this shift in the balance of forces. And just to come to the end of that and kind of wrap it up, if you like, I know we've really gone over time, but for me, the function of Marxism is to help the masses understand the power that they have. Just like we're seeing in the resistance forces now, they've understood, they've learned the lessons of their history and understood the only way we can win is to get together and fight to the end. And there's no compromise possible with these people, because you give them an inch, they will take a mile, and then they'll take 10 miles, and then they'll take absolutely everything. And you thought that you had signed a deal that was, you know, written in blood and would never be rescinded on, but that's not how imperialism works. It will always come back and take off you what you thought that you had conquered if you haven't fought to the total finish. So we need the workers to understand, number one, that they are the ruling class in waiting. Number two, that they have huge power. They are the masses. Ultimately, no power can defeat the masses. None. Not even technological dominance ultimately can defeat the people organized and armed and resisting. We have all the power. The ruling class gives orders. It's usually us that's carrying them out. You know, we don't recognize our power because we've been brainwashed so effectively into feeling like weak individuals. But if we understand that we have power, if we organize and learn how to use that power, there's nothing that can stop us. That's the importance of organization connected to Marxist science. You need those two things together for the working class power to be unleashed in the right direction. And in that way, you know, the revolutionary movement can actually fulfill its destiny.
Let me ask you this. Do you have 5 more minutes?
Go on then.
Okay. I'll make a statement. You don't even have to comment. Something about that if you choose, you can. You know, I think there's another tremendous fear for the imperialists when it comes to losing the war. You know, something that we've talked about, right? And that is, we're the good guys. So look at their pictures. We're standing for the women, for people of color. We're standing, we've got to go to this country because we've got to bring them democracy, right? It is this veneer of, you know, morality. We're doing all these things for good reasons, right? To help people for wonderful things. That's what imperialism is all about right now. Let me just make this quick. I guess I'm an old school person, right? And so horror movies, I don't like the new stuff. I like the old stuff. Zombies, werewolves, and vampires. There we go. Give me a good old movie like that. I love it, right? In the werewolf movie, in the zombie movies, the vampire movies, the vampire was always either a very beautiful woman or a very handsome man, right? And they could attract their prey with their looks, and then they'd bite them in the neck and boom, that was it for the prey, right? But in the movie, a lot of these movies, just before they would attack their prey, they would transform. And you could now see them as this horrible, horrifying looking being. The person screams, but it's too late. They get bit in the neck. They're done, right? But if they looked like that all along, they would never attract their prey. They had to be the beautiful, shapely woman or the handsome, cool guy with the tux on. They could attract their prey. Okay. The imperialism, we're here to protect you, Europe. We're here to look out for you. We're your friends. We're going to make sure that you're safe and blah, blah, blah. We're the handsome protector, right? If they lose, Ukraine, we're there. Look at all these nice things we're giving you, uniforms, guns to protect yourselves from the evil Russians, all of this stuff. Oh, we're going to make sure that you're safe when the Russians, in case the Russians attack you, blah, blah, blah. This veneer that they are the protector, they're the good looking protector that's coming, right? Okay. In the event that they lose, which they will, the Ukrainians wake up and say, holy mother of God, look what you've done to us. That fiendish, demonic looking monster is revealed. And now they can see this thing. The Europeans wake up and say, you guys blew up the Nord Stream pipeline and you deindustrialized us and you destroyed everything. They are revealed. Now, the world, instead of being the handsome man or the beautiful woman that attracts their prey, the Europeans and the Ukrainians wake up and say, oh my God, you really are that ugly demonic monster with the long, scary fingers and the fangs. And the rest of the world looks and says, hey, all this business about pink washing and standing up for us and everything, when you come to town, we can see the monster that you are. The big problem with losing is the Ukrainians, their allies, and the Europeans, so-called allies and the ones they protect. Now look at them for who they are. And the world now looks at the U.S. imperialism, and they're no longer the handsome guy or the beautiful woman. And add what's happening in Occupy Palestine, right? Everybody looks at them, and that I'm the beautiful, handsome protector, potential mate, whatever, is gone. And they are revealed, and the world can see this horrifying, frightening, demonic beast. That's the problem they have with losing in Palestine, losing in Ukraine, and being found out by the Europeans is that handsome, pretty smile is gone. And now when they go to Asia and say, hey, Philippines, this guy, hey, how about we're friends with you, Vietnam? Everybody will say, no, I can see you now. You're a demonic, scary monster. No, thanks. Your thoughts of that? I mean, do you have a minute or two? If not, if you got to go, I understand.
I do, but yeah, you might be sorry you asked me.
No, I won't. Trust me.
You know, all of this is really the result of the post-October world, as in post October 1917 Russian Revolution, socialist revolution world, which changed the world by revealing that all the myths on which imperialists before then based their propaganda were lies. So in the pre-World War I days of empire, the British, the French went around the world saying, you know, Rudyard Kipling famously wrote poems about the white man's burden, right? It's our historical destiny because we're just superior to bring civilization to the backward and benighted peoples. And even in the colonized world, there were many people who bought into this idea. It must be true. They said it openly, proudly. We are real human beings. The rest of the world, the uncivilized masses, the dark races, they are inferior beings. And they even came up with, you know, the Victorians were into finding science that will prove that the darker races are inferior to the white race, and all of this. You know, it was a useful tool of colonialism, racism, to make this line. You know, in the early days of the slavery that was used in the modern era, the capitalist era, there were white slaves, but it became useful to only enslave black people, so that you had this line and you could justify it philosophically by saying, well, they're not really human beings. They're not as developed. They're not as, you know, this is all they're fit for. We are the upholders of civilization, people with white skins, you know. That became useful imperialist propaganda and colonialist propaganda. So October Revolution changed all of that, turned it all upside down. It overturned the idea of colonial backwardness, of the racist ideologies of imperialism, which had been publicly expressed. It overturned the myth that women are inferior. And in doing so, it really forced the ruling class onto the back foot, especially after World War II, when the empires, the old empires, were receding and US imperialism was kind of usurping their place in many places. The US had to dress itself up in the clothes of October. It had to go everywhere and say, oh, we believe in equality of everybody. We believe in the rights of women. We believe in the rights of small nations. We believe in the rights of, we believe in anti-racism. You know, we're against, even though they still had Jim Crow and everything in their own country. They went around the world pretending that they didn't. Say, no, we believe in equality of small nations, and we're here. We're your friend. You know, we're not like those. We're not coming to occupy you. We're not like those old empires. We're doing a different thing here. And of course, even the USA did have some physical territories, but, you know, compared to the British Empire in particular, very few. And it was able to present itself in this different way. But the fact that it needed to present itself in that way was actually a sign of moral defeat. The masses of the world had taken on the ideology of socialism in the sense of national liberation ideology is now totally embedded in the minds of everybody everywhere. It's why the Palestinian struggle is fundamentally unbeatable, because they set up their settler colony after World War II in the era of national liberation, when the Palestinian people were imbued with the understanding that they're equal to anybody else. And no fascist-minded person is going to make them think any differently, to paraphrase Paul Robeson, right? That the settler colony can inflict devastating punishment on them, but it can't chase the ideology of national liberation out of their minds. It's too late historically for that. So the imperialists have had to dress up, put on the clothes of the socialists in order to prosecute their minds and present themselves in a way where enough people feel benign towards them or feel that their role in the world is somehow a progressive role. But life, as you said, is exposing this reality. Their hypocrisy is now a big part of their undoing. As the hypocrisy is exposed, the anger of the masses becomes more and more. You know, not only are they angry about their economic conditions, they're angry about the lies they've been told, and they're questioning. Once they wake up to some of the lies, more and more things they begin to question. And this process has been ongoing for a time, but the genocide in Palestine in particular, the real-time nature of getting these images on their phones at the same time, literally, Garland, at the same time as they're seeing the statements of their leading media, the statements of their leading politicians denying reality that everybody knows because they're getting it all in real time, seeing them lie about those things, seeing them give unconditional support for what is obviously revealed as a genocidal regime, seeing them keep justifying sending weapons and make the most because of public pressure, they make the odd mealy-mouthed statement about how they don't like violence or how they hope they're putting on pressure for peace or, some other rubbish. But it's becoming increasingly clear to people the real nature, as you said, the real nature of the beast. The mask is coming off and revealing the true horror. And we are coming closer and closer to the situation that Lenin described when he talked about what are the conditions that make for revolution. He said, on the one hand, there needs to be a general political crisis, which means the ruling class itself is no longer able to rule in the old way. At the same time, there needs to be a popular political crisis, upheaval socially, which means the working class is no longer willing to be ruled in the old way. Well, we're not exactly there yet, but can't you see both those things developing rapidly in front of us? The possibilities for successful working class and mass action against imperialism are really opening up to us in this present period of time. And the onus is on us to do the work of helping the working class realize that there are incredible opportunities actually coming towards them that they need to take advantage of, strike the decisive blow against this system while it's reeling, while it's weakening, and free ourselves finally to go into a real future of prosperity.
Well, thank you very much, Joti. Where can everybody find your stuff online?
Oh, yeah. So I am at thecommunists.org. That's my party's website. Please do come and find
our
analysis.
Make sure the communists with an S.
With an S, absolutely.
Yes.
Or you'll get some CIA-backed Trotskyite organization. So thecommunists.org is our party's website. You will get analysis on every important topic there of a kind you don't get anywhere else. So please sign up to our newsletter, visit our website. A good way to keep across all of our output is to sign up to our Telegram channel. No algorithms will get in the way of your receiving all our information until such time as Telegram is banned in our countries. The Communists is our party's Telegram channel. My personal Telegram channel is Joti Brar. So you can follow me there. We're on Twitter, on YouTube, we are Proletarian TV. That channel is also available on Rumble and Odyssey. But Telegram is the easiest way to kind of find all of our stuff in one place.
And before we go, everybody follow me also on Rumble and Rockfin, just in case, they're throwing a lot of people off of YouTube these days. Everything's scrolling across the bottom, whether it's Patreon or buy me a coffee. If you can afford to support the channel, that's certainly appreciated. It's funny you mentioned Paul Robeson. Before we go, let me show you a picture. This is me with Paul Robeson Jr., who was my mentor for many years. I don't know if people can see it or not. It's kind of dark, but that's me with Paul Robeson Jr. As you can see, I was a bit of a younger man there, but that was a really outstanding. So every time I hear somebody mention Paul Robeson, it just sends a warmth through my heart. I heard his philosophy for years through his father, and I learned so much. That's probably why I ended up being like attracted to the ideology, attracted to the discussions of such a brilliant mind as Joti Brar. And you've been really great. I mean, I'm looking in the chat and people are like, I adore this woman. Oh my gosh, she's wonderful. Oh, she's brilliant, blah, blah, blah. We all learn a lot, and I appreciate it. I know you're busy, Joti. And now that Radio Sputnik is, I guess, the Imperialist had enough of the revolutionary work that I was doing on the air in Washington, D.C. But so I'm going to have a lot more time. So whenever you're available, you're welcome on the channel. Hopefully we'll be able to get you on here weekly. But if something else big comes up during the week, I'll certainly contact you and see if we can get a comment, even if it's a brief one. So thank you very much, everyone. Follow Joti and support her and all of her good work. Thank you very much. We're out.